Okay, let's dive right into this. You know that feeling of being just completely exhausted by the endless treadmill of self improvement, right? Well, I've got a pretty radical idea for you today. That burnout you're feeling, it's not a personal failure. Actually, it's a feature of the system. Today, we're unpacking The Lost Art of Being Good Enough by Alex Harper, and we're going to fundamentally change how you look at the wellness industry. Listen to this quote. You've been sold a lie. Not just any lie, but the most profitable lie in history, that you are not enough. Just let that sink in for a sec. Read it again. I mean, it totally validates that exhaustion we were just talking about, right? And it immediately nails the core problem with the modern self-improvement industry. We're constantly being told that we need fixing, that we're fundamentally lacking somehow, and that true peace is just always slightly out of reach. $15,000. That's not a typo. That staggering number is what the average American drops every single year on self-improvement products, wellness services, lifestyle tweaks, the whole shebang. To put that into perspective, globally, we are pouring over $10 trillion a year into this. 10 trillion. It's an elaborate system literally designed to keep us perpetually reaching for the next fix. We're basically funding a massive industry built entirely on our own insecurities. Crazy, right? So here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start with the age of inadequacy, then uncover the self-improvement profit machine, move on to reclaiming your internal authority, equip you with the authenticity toolkit, and finally launch the radical rest rebellion.
All right, Section 1, the age of inadequacy. So, how exactly did we get here?
Well, historically, consumer capitalism focused on checking off physical needs, food, shelter, clothing. But once those basic survival needs were met, the system kind of hit a wall. It needed a new way to grow. So it shifted gears. It went from fulfilling physical needs to creating limitless psychological desires. It literally convinced us we had this deep emotional void. The wellness business model is honestly incredibly simple. Create wounds, then sell you the really expensive bandages. The game is rigged. The perfect consumer for this industry isn't someone who actually heals and goes on their merry way. No, it's someone who believes their healing is always just one more purchase, one more app subscription, or, one more retreat away. Which brings us to Section 2, the self-improvement profit machine. Let's look behind the scenes. Let's move to this and see how it builds. We're going to expose the exact machinery operating here. Now, the wellness marketplace isn't some shadowy conspiracy. It's just a system with structural incentives, and it operates on a vicious cycle. Step 1, create a deficit. They tell you you've got problem areas or, blocked energy. Step 2, amplify that awareness. They use highly emotional language to make a totally normal human variation feel like a 5-alarm crisis. Step 3, position their specific product as the ultimate solution. But step 4, this is the kicker, sell partial relief. It works just enough to validate your purchase, but it inevitably fades, which leads perfectly into step 5, introducing new related deficits. That partial relief is basically their golden ticket because it ensures you stay subscribed to their ecosystem forever. And who exactly is selling you all this relief? Let's playfully decode what the author calls guru math. Look at this table. A single weekend workshop suddenly translates to being deeply trained in a complex modality. Add a basic certification to a nicely curated Instagram account, and boom, you're a thought leader. A tourist retreat in Bali magically becomes studied with masters. And if you combine 3 basic certs, congratulations, you're now a methodology creator. It just illustrates how ordinary people manufacture this spiritual authority through minimal effort and aesthetic branding. It's basically masking a profound lack of actual expertise. So how do we spot the marketing fiction? Well, here's your bullshit detection kit. First, watch out for the universal promise. Works for everyone. Human bodies and minds are way too complex and diverse for one thing to work for everyone. Next, beware the miracle time frame, like 21 days to fix your whole life. Yeah, right. Also watch out for the scientific veneer, those vague studies show claims that conveniently lack any actual citations. And finally, the ancient wisdom claim. Usually, this is just a cultural practice stripped of its context and repackaged for a massive Western markup. Remember, if it sounds like a universal fairy tale, it almost certainly is. Okay, let's shift gears into Section 3, reclaiming your internal authority. It's time to reclaim your experience. So, we've done a lot of critiquing of the system. Now, let's talk about empowerment. In a world constantly trying to sell you the narrative that you're broken and need external fixing, the absolute most rebellious thing you can do is to start trusting your own experience again. Seriously. To do that, we have to close what's called the authority gap. This is the space between our innate capacity to know what we actually need and our socially conditioned habit of deferring to external gurus. We've been trained since childhood to look outside ourselves for the right answers, haven't we? Overcoming this gap requires writing yourself permission slips, literally giving yourself explicit permission to abandon practices that just don't serve you, and doing it without the usual guilt or shame attached. And that brings us to a really stark contrast we all face. We often compare ourselves to an idealistic practice, like, say, a punishing 60-minute daily meditation that external gurus insist is the only way to true enlightenment. But actually, scratch that. We need to shift to a reality-based practice. Think 3 minutes of mindful breathing between your Zoom calls. We have got to stop comparing ourselves to these punishing, idealized wellness goals. Reality-based practices actually fit into a busy, messy human life, and honestly, they're far more effective simply because you're actually gonna do them. Which perfectly sets up Section 4, the Authenticity Toolkit. Let's find what actually works for you. Now we're going to introduce the practical, concrete tools you need to discover what works for your unique body, your schedule, your specific circumstances. We're entirely bypassing those filtered Instagram perfect expectations. The first tool in your kit is the MED, or minimum effective dose. Borrowed from pharmacology, this is the absolute smallest input needed to produce the desired outcome. So, the crucial point is, finding your MED is all about efficiency and sustainability. It is absolutely not about laziness. It's asking yourself, what is the simplest, most stripped-down version of this practice that still gives me the core benefits, but without taking over my entire life? Then we have the 70% rule. Aiming for just 70% of perfect implementation yields the vast majority of the benefits, while crucially maintaining your sanity. I want to give us all a literal permission pause right here. Just slow down. Let it sink in that good enough is very often the most optimal, sustainable choice you can possibly make. The relationship between effort and results isn't linear, guys. Pursuing that last 30% of perfection usually costs way, way too much time and emotional energy. Finally, we enter Section 5, the Radical Rest Rebellion. Let's reclaim your downtime. Here, we're going to tackle the ultimate boss of wellness fatigue. I'm talking about our absolute, collective inability in modern society to just sit down and do nothing. Society enforces this incredibly toxic hierarchy that dictates our downtime. At the very top is productive leisure, things like learning a new language or building a skill. In the middle, we've got quality leisure, like visiting museums or taking these vigorous nature walks. And at the bottom, heavily stigmatized, is low-value leisure. Watching Netflix or literally just staring at a wall doing nothing. This completely breaks down why we feel that intense Netflix guilt. We feel ashamed when we engage in rest that doesn't produce some tangible, Instagram-worthy output. But the severe biological cost of this productivity mindset is staggering. Productive relaxation keeps your nervous system in a state of chronic partial activation. Think about it. If you turn your sleep into a data-tracked game with rings you have to close, or your yoga into a competitive sport, you are actively preventing your nervous system from shifting into that parasympathetic rest and digest mode. You're constantly hanging out in a state of low-grade fight or flight, never fully engaged, but never really fully at rest either. So, the powerful antidote to all of this is strategic uselessness. This is the intentional, totally unapologetic practice of spending time that has absolutely no productive value whatsoever by any conventional metric. I want you to frame simply saying nah and embracing complete uselessness as a revolutionary act of resistance. Because it is. It's how you push back against an economic and cultural system that is obsessively determined to optimize every single second of your existence. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Would you have the courage to choose what genuinely works for you over what looks like it's working on Instagram? Think about that for a second. You have the power and the permission to define your own adequacy. You don't need fixing, and you definitely don't need another expensive bandage. It's time to fully embrace the radical, beautiful, and incredibly liberating art of simply being good enough. Thank you so much for exploring this with me today, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.